In the rugged highlands of ancient Macedonia, where the mountains scraped the skies and the valleys ran with wild rivers, a child was born in the year 356 BC, whose life would come to eclipse kingdoms and echo through the annals of history. Alexander, son of Philip II of Macedon and Olympias of Epirus, entered a world defined by ambition, conflict, and opportunity. Macedonia itself was a land often overlooked by the great powers of Greece, yet it was forged in the crucible of relentless warfare, political intrigue, and strategic cunning. In this small kingdom, life and death were inseparable from politics, and survival demanded brilliance as much as courage. From his earliest days, Alexander's life was intertwined with destiny. His father, Philip II, was no ordinary king. He had transformed Macedonia from a fractious collection of tribes into a centralized military state capable of challenging even the Persian Empire. His reforms of the army, introducing the Macedonian phalanx with its deadly sarissas, and integrating highly disciplined cavalry units, created a military machine that was unprecedented in scale and sophistication for its time. It was in this environment of strategic innovation and ambition that Alexander's mind began to take shape. The boy did not simply inherit a throne. He inherited the weight of expectation, the machinery of a modernizing army, and the knowledge that his life would be measured not by survival, but by conquest. Alexander's mother, Olympias, added to this environment of ambition and myth. She was a woman of intense character, deeply religious, and a devotee of the Orphic mysteries, which often spoke of the divine and heroic destinies of men. Olympias instilled in Alexander a sense of exceptionalism, a belief that he was not merely a man but a force shaped by the gods. Ancient sources hint at her prophecy that her son would achieve greatness beyond imagination, and Alexander would carry this aura of divine favor throughout his life, using it as both shield and sword in the political and military arenas he would come to dominate. The Macedonia into which Alexander was born was no gentle backwater. It was a kingdom perched on the northern periphery of the Greek world, often dismissed by the city-states of the south as a barbaric land of rough warriors and simple villages. Yet beneath this veneer lay a sophisticated polity, capable of remarkable military innovation. Philip II's campaigns had subdued internal dissent and extended Macedonian influence across the region, yet the kingdom remained vulnerable. Neighboring Thracians, Illyrians, and Greeks watched Macedonia with wary eyes, ready to exploit any sign of weakness. In such an environment, the lessons of survival, leadership, and strategy were not abstract. They were essential. Alexander would learn them early, absorbing the military culture, political cunning, and the necessity of decisiveness. From a young age, Alexander displayed an insatiable curiosity and a precocious intellect. He learned to ride horses with confidence that defied his years, mastering the steed with a balance and courage that would later translate into battlefield command. His understanding of tactics began not in scrolls, but in the practice of riding and leading small groups, testing coordination and control in the hills around Pella, the Macedonian capital. The ancient historian Plutarch recounts that Alexander tamed Bucephalus, a horse considered untamable by even seasoned horsemen, by recognizing that the animal feared its own shadow. This story is not merely anecdotal. It illustrates the formative traits that would define Alexander's military genius: observation, understanding, adaptability, and the courage to act decisively where others hesitated. Education played an equally critical role. Philip ensured that his son would be tutored by the greatest minds available, and Aristotle, the preeminent philosopher of the age, became Alexander's teacher and mentor. Under Aristotle, Alexander studied philosophy, science, medicine, literature, and political theory. The young prince absorbed not just knowledge of the natural world, but also an understanding of human nature, governance, and the moral and ethical dilemmas that leaders face. Aristotle would reportedly gift Alexander a copy of Homer's Iliad, which he treasured throughout his life, seeing in its heroes models of courage, ambition, and strategic brilliance. In Homer, Alexander found a blueprint for greatness, learning that the measure of a man is not merely in his birth, but in the deeds he performs and the legacy he leaves. Yet knowledge alone does not create a conqueror. The true test of Alexander's character was forged in the political and military turbulence of his youth. Macedonia was still a kingdom in which power was asserted through blood and sword. Revolts, feuds among noble families, and the constant threat of assassination or invasion required not only intelligence but cunning, decisiveness, and the ability to inspire loyalty. Alexander witnessed the assassination of his father at the hands of a court conspirator, a brutal reminder of the stakes involved in power. At 20, he would inherit a throne surrounded by enemies, both domestic and foreign, and it was in this crucible that his leadership capacity would be tested. Alexander's early life also reveals a complex interplay of culture and ambition. He was Macedonian by birth, yet he was deeply influenced by Greek culture, philosophy, and ideals of heroism. This dual identity would define much of his later campaigns, as he sought not only to conquer, but to unite the diverse peoples of the known world under a vision of Hellenistic culture. From his earliest years, Alexander demonstrated an ability to understand, manipulate, and integrate cultural forces, a skill that would prove as vital as any weapon on the battlefield. The Macedonian army, which he would eventually command, was more than a collection of soldiers. It was a microcosm of the kingdom itself, reflecting discipline, hierarchy, and innovation. Alexander's exposure to its training, structure, and strategy from childhood allowed him to see the potential not just for conquest, but for transformation. He did not view the army merely as a tool of war. He saw it as an extension of his own mind, a living instrument through which he could project his vision. Even in these formative years, the boy who would become Alexander the Great exhibited qualities that separated him from ordinary mortals. Courage, intellect, ambition, and a relentless drive for mastery were fused with an almost obsessive sense of destiny. The world seemed to recognize him, and he carried an aura that would grow as he matured, convincing both men and gods, allies and enemies, that he was destined for unparalleled greatness. By the time he reached adolescence, Alexander had already begun to internalize the lessons of leadership and strategy that would define his adult life. He learned that victories were won not by strength alone, but by foresight, adaptability, and the ability to seize the moment when others hesitated. He saw that power depended as much on perception and loyalty as on force. These lessons, absorbed in the shadow of Macedonia's mountains, among the whispers of ambitious courtiers, and in the classrooms of philosophers, would shape the trajectory of his life. As the young Alexander looked out over the rugged Macedonian landscape, the world beyond was vast and untamed. Persia loomed to the east. The Greek city-states churned with political tension to the south, and distant lands whispered promises of wealth, glory, and conquest. In the heart of Macedonia, amidst the stone fortresses and training grounds, the foundations of a legend were being laid. It was here, in the interplay of nature, nurture, and destiny, that the future's greatest general in history began to emerge. And so, the stage was set. A boy born in 356 BC, nurtured by a king and philosopher trained in both intellect and war, would rise to challenge empires, inspire loyalty in men from every corner of the known world, and leave a legacy that would echo through the centuries. The world was about to witness the birth of Alexander the Great, the man who would redefine warfare, leadership, and the very notion of empire itself. The story of his life would not be merely about battles and conquests. It would be about ambition, vision, culture, and the relentless pursuit of a destiny that even the gods might envy. The story of Alexander's greatness does not begin on the battlefield, but in the quiet chambers of study, the winding paths of Macedonian hills, and the disciplined formations of a young army in training. If one seeks to understand the making of the greatest general in history, one must first examine the foundations upon which his mind and character were forged. Alexander's education was extraordinary not simply for the knowledge it imparted, but for the perspective it gave him. A worldview that married the pragmatism of conquest with the philosophy of kings, the art of strategy with the understanding of human nature. Philip II, recognizing both his son's promise and the precarious position of his kingdom, ensured that Alexander's education was unmatched. While many princes learned the mechanics of war through rote drill or inherited reputation, Alexander was tutored by Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of the age. Under Aristotle, Alexander absorbed the breadth of human knowledge: philosophy, science, literature, logic, and politics. But Aristotle's lessons were not abstract. They were designed to forge a ruler capable of understanding not only his army but the people, cultures, and cities he would one day govern. The young prince was taught to think critically, to question assumptions, to analyze the causes of events and the motivations of men. These were not the lessons of a scholar alone, but the tools of a strategist who would one day face entire empires and win. It was Aristotle who introduced Alexander to the Iliad, and particularly to the hero Achilles. This was no casual gift of literature, it was a map for ambition. Alexander identified with Achilles in both his glory and his hubris, internalizing the lessons of courage, honor, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. Plutarch recounts that Alexander would sleep with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow, and that he would carry its lessons into every campaign. But it was not mere emulation. Alexander synthesized Homeric heroism with real-world strategy, turning legend into practical leadership. He learned that victory required more than courage. It demanded foresight, initiative, and the ability to inspire men to believe in something larger than themselves. Alexander's education extended beyond the walls of the palace and the philosopher's lecture hall. The Macedonian countryside became his training ground. Here, he learned horsemanship and the art of commanding men in motion. His early exploits with horses are legendary. He tamed Bucephalus, a horse deemed unmanageable by even seasoned riders, by observing that the animal's fear stemmed from its own shadow. This story, often recounted as a symbol of Alexander's courage, reveals a deeper truth about his mind: the ability to observe, understand, and act decisively where others failed. In that moment, Alexander demonstrated not just bravery, but insight, empathy, and strategic foresight, all traits that would define his military campaigns. In addition to physical training, Alexander was exposed to the Macedonian army from a young age. He witnessed Philip's campaigns firsthand, observing the meticulous organization of the phalanx, the coordination of cavalry, and the integration of logistics with battlefield strategy. He watched generals maneuver divisions, supply lines maintained across difficult terrain, and soldiers' morale carefully tended. From these experiences, Alexander internalized a fundamental lesson. An army is not merely a collection of men and weapons. It is a living instrument that must be guided, motivated, and adapted to the circumstances of each battle. Leadership in history is often measured by victories, but Alexander understood that victories begin long before the first clash of spears. Alexander's character was also shaped by the psychological lessons of observation and interaction with men from different cultures. Philip's campaigns brought Macedonia into contact with Thracians, Illyrians, and Greek city-states, each with its own customs, strengths, and weaknesses. Alexander learned early that leadership required not only command but diplomacy, negotiation, and understanding the loyalties and fears of those he sought to lead. The ability to integrate diverse peoples into a cohesive force would become one of his defining strategies during later campaigns across Persia, Egypt, and beyond. Yet, the making of a leader is never purely intellectual or strategic. Alexander's temperament, ambition, and intensity were tested through personal and political challenges. He grew up under a mother whose ambitions for him were unrelenting, and a father whose expectations were exacting. Family tensions, court intrigue, and the shadow of assassination were ever present in Macedonian politics. Alexander learned to navigate these treacherous waters with cunning, decisiveness, and a keen sense of timing. In adolescence, he faced threats from both within his family and from rival nobles who sought to undermine him. Each trial taught him resilience, patience, and the importance of seizing initiative before rivals could act, a lesson that would prove indispensable when he ascended to the throne. Education, mentorship, and personal experience combined to form a leader uniquely equipped for conquest. Alexander's mind was trained to balance philosophy with practicality, ambition with discipline, and observation with decisive action. While other rulers might rely on inherited reputation or brute force, Alexander's strength lay in synthesis, a capacity to combine knowledge, insight, and tactical genius into a single coherent vision. The Macedonian army was an instrument of this vision, and Alexander would learn to wield it with unprecedented precision. Aristotle also instilled in Alexander an understanding of governance and cultural integration. He taught the prince to value knowledge, respect customs, and appreciate how culture could stabilize an empire. These lessons were critical, for Alexander's ambition extended far beyond simple conquest. He sought to unite peoples under Hellenistic influence, to create a civilization that blended Greek ideals with local traditions. Leadership in history is often measured by victories alone, but Alexander's vision encompassed not only the battlefield but the structure, identity, and cohesion of an empire that stretched across continents. By the time Alexander reached young adulthood, his reputation was already forming. Stories circulated of his intelligence, courage, and ambition. His interactions with soldiers and generals revealed a natural authority. Men were drawn to follow him, not merely because of his rank, but because of the clarity of his vision and the decisiveness of his actions. Leadership is a performance as much as a skill, and Alexander mastered both. He commanded respect through example, inspired loyalty through action, and cultivated an aura of destiny that amplified his authority. This period also marked the formation of key strategic instincts. Alexander learned to value flexibility over rigidity, initiative over obedience, and adaptability over dogma. In the Macedonian army, drills and formations were standard, but the young prince observed that the ability to read a battlefield, anticipate enemy moves, and exploit weaknesses was what truly determined success. These lessons were etched into his consciousness, forming the cognitive foundation of campaigns that would later confound Persia, Egypt, and India. Finally, Alexander's education and early experiences instilled in him a profound sense of purpose. He was taught that greatness was not inherited, it was seized. Through intellect, courage, and calculated action, a single individual could shape the destiny of nations. This conviction, combined with his natural ambition, created a leader whose vision and willpower would surpass those of any contemporary ruler. The seeds planted in the mountains and palaces of Macedonia, nurtured by Aristotle's wisdom and Philip's tutelage, would grow into the relentless drive that defined Alexander's life. In these formative years, we see the making of more than a soldier. We see the shaping of a mind capable of commanding empires, inspiring loyalty across cultures, and envisioning a world united under his influence. Alexander was not born a general in the conventional sense, but he was educated, disciplined, and molded into one. His early experiences laid the foundation for what the ancient world would later recognize as unparalleled genius, a combination of intellect, courage, ambition, and the ability to see both the battlefield and the empire in a single, unified vision. As the sun rose over Macedonia, casting its light across the hills and valleys that had nurtured the boy, the foundations of destiny were complete. Alexander's mind had been tempered by knowledge, challenged by experience, and inspired by legend. The instruments of empire, the army, diplomacy, and culture were already becoming extensions of his will. The world would soon bear witness to the results of this extraordinary preparation. From these beginnings, the greatest general in history was quietly taking shape, unaware yet of the monumental events that would define his life and, ultimately, the course of civilizations. The death of Philip II in 336 BCE was more than a familial tragedy. It was a seismic event that shook the very foundations of Macedonia and the Greek world. The king, who had transformed a once fractious collection of tribes into a formidable military power, had built an empire on discipline, cunning, and relentless ambition. But with his sudden assassination, the mantle of leadership fell upon his 20-year-old son, Alexander, a young man with unparalleled training, vision, and ambition, yet untested in the crucible of rule. The circumstances surrounding Philip's death were shrouded in intrigue, and whispers of conspiracy filled the Macedonian courts. In such an environment, the young prince had to act with both decisiveness and speed, for hesitation could be fatal. Leadership in history is often forged in moments of crisis, and Alexander's accession would be no exception. From the moment of his father's death, the question of legitimacy loomed large. Macedonia, though centralized under Philip's reforms, was a kingdom still rife with factionalism. Noble families, each with their own power base, eyed the throne, ready to exploit any weakness. Revolts flared in key regions such as Thrace and Illyria, where loyalty to the young king was far from guaranteed. Even within the Macedonian army, veteran generals and officers questioned whether a boy could command the loyalty and discipline that Philip had instilled over decades. To ascend successfully, Alexander needed to consolidate power quickly, eliminate threats, and assert authority not merely by birthright, but through action, a test that would define his approach to leadership for the rest of his life. Alexander's response was swift and strategic. Recognizing that perception was as vital as force, he moved to eliminate immediate threats and secure the loyalty of key military and political figures. He confronted rebellious noblemen with a combination of diplomacy, intimidation, and decisive action, demonstrating that while he respected the traditions of Macedonia, he would tolerate no insubordination. One by one, potential rivals were neutralized either through careful negotiation or the firm application of authority. By acting decisively in the opening months of his reign, Alexander not only secured his position but sent a clear message. The mantle of kingship was his, and he would wield it with precision and ruthlessness. Beyond internal consolidation, Alexander faced the delicate task of unifying the Greek city-states under Macedonian dominance. Philip II had already extended Macedonia's influence over Greece through the League of Corinth, yet this arrangement was fragile. Many city-states, particularly Athens and Thebes, chafed under Macedonian authority, viewing the young king as inexperienced and vulnerable. Alexander understood that diplomacy alone would not suffice. He needed to demonstrate both his strategic acumen and his willingness to enforce Macedonian hegemony when necessary. To this end, he combined tactful negotiation with displays of military strength, sending a clear signal that Macedonia would remain the dominant power in Greece. Alexander's first military actions as king were crucial in establishing his reputation and authority. He led campaigns against rebellious factions, demonstrating not only courage but remarkable tactical skill for one so young. These early victories were more than mere military exercises. They were political statements, showing both allies and adversaries that Alexander could wield power effectively. Each battle reinforced his image as a decisive leader capable of commanding loyalty and respect, essential traits for a ruler whose ambitions would extend far beyond Macedonia. Psychologically, the young king faced immense pressures. Ascending to the throne at 20 meant inheriting the expectations of his father, the demands of an ambitious army, and the scrutiny of a skeptical Greek world. Yet Alexander displayed an extraordinary blend of confidence, charisma, and foresight. He understood that leadership was not merely about reacting to events, but about shaping them. By anticipating challenges, whether from within his court, among rebellious nobles, or in the Greek city-states, Alexander demonstrated a level of strategic foresight that belied his age. Leadership, he realized, was as much about perception, timing, and political acumen as it was about military genius. Alexander's ability to inspire loyalty became evident during this early period. He cultivated personal relationships with key commanders and soldiers, understanding that an army functions not merely through orders, but through commitment and trust. By sharing in their hardships, leading from the front, and demonstrating courage in the face of danger, he earned devotion that would later allow him to undertake campaigns across continents, often in circumstances that would have broken lesser armies. This early mastery of leadership psychology, understanding motivation, morale, and personal loyalty, was as critical to his success as any phalanx or cavalry maneuver. The young king also recognized the importance of symbols and legitimacy. He positioned himself as both heir to Philip's legacy and as a visionary ruler with his own destiny. In doing so, he appealed to Macedonian tradition while signaling a new era of ambition. Alexander adopted ceremonial displays, patronage, and public acts that reinforced his authority, ensuring that both the court and the army recognized his sovereignty. This combination of force, diplomacy, and psychological insight became a hallmark of his leadership style, one that would carry him from Macedonia to the farthest reaches of Asia. It is essential to consider the broader geopolitical stakes. Persia, to the east, was vast and resource-rich, a prize that Philip II had long contemplated but never fully attempted to conquer. Greece, to the south, was fractious and culturally influential, yet divided and ripe for Macedonian dominance. Alexander inherited not only a kingdom but a vision, a roadmap for conquest that required political skill, military innovation, and personal charisma. His initial months as king were a microcosm of these challenges, securing loyalty at home while projecting power abroad. Success in this delicate balancing act would determine whether he could transform his inherited kingdom into a launching point for the empire he envisioned. Alexander's accession was also marked by acts of calculated ruthlessness. Potential threats, whether rivals in the court or former allies of Philip who might question his legitimacy, were neutralized efficiently. Unlike many young rulers who relied solely on advisors, Alexander displayed decisiveness and personal judgment, showing that he understood the precarious nature of power. His willingness to act swiftly and decisively was a pattern that would repeat throughout his campaigns, whether in the Persian heartlands or on the banks of the Hydaspes. In leadership, hesitation is often fatal. Alexander's early reign demonstrated that he had internalized this principle. Culturally and intellectually, Alexander's early rule was also significant. He maintained close ties with his tutor, Aristotle, ensuring that his decisions were informed by both philosophy and pragmatism. This integration of intellect with action would define his approach to empire building. Campaigns were planned not only for conquest, but for political and cultural integration. Alexander understood that ruling an empire required more than military skill. It required the ability to govern diverse peoples, respect local customs, and project an image of legitimacy that transcended brute force. This duality, warrior and philosopher, would set him apart from virtually every contemporary ruler. By the end of his first year as king, Alexander had accomplished what few could achieve. He had consolidated his throne, neutralized internal threats, asserted Macedonian dominance over Greece, and established himself as a figure of unassailable authority. Yet this was only the beginning. The young king, though victorious at home, had set his eyes on a vision that extended far beyond Macedonia. A campaign of conquest that would challenge the Persian Empire, reshape the Greek world, and leave a legacy that would endure for millennia. The crucible of succession had forged in him the decisiveness, strategic insight, and personal authority that would make him not just a ruler, but the greatest general in history. Alexander's early reign also reveals the interplay between personality and circumstance in the making of a legend. His ambition, tempered by intellect and courage, allowed him to navigate crises that would have overwhelmed lesser men. His capacity to act decisively under pressure, to inspire loyalty in men from diverse backgrounds, and to anticipate both political and military challenges reflects the combination of traits that would define every campaign he led. The Macedonian throne was not merely inherited, it was earned through action, strategy, and vision. Ultimately, the ascension of Alexander to the throne of Macedonia was more than a dynastic transition. It was the moment in which history recognized a figure whose ambition, intellect, and leadership potential would soon outstrip the boundaries of his kingdom. In those critical months following Philip's death, Alexander demonstrated the qualities that would make him legendary: decisiveness, tactical foresight, psychological acumen, and the ability to inspire loyalty and fear in equal measure. The path of conquest that lay ahead, from the banks of the Granicus to the deserts of Egypt, from the mountains of India to the ruins of Persia, was rooted in this early mastery of leadership. As the young king gazed upon his kingdom, secure yet surrounded by challenges, one could almost glimpse the contours of the empire to come. Alexander would not only inherit Macedonia, he would inherit a vision, a blueprint for conquest, integration, and cultural transformation. The throne was not merely a seat of power, it was the launching pad for the campaigns that would define an era. In ascending to the throne, Alexander did not simply become king. He became a force capable of reshaping the known world. A man whose strategies, decisions, and vision would elevate him to the rank of the greatest general in history. The crossing of the Hellespont in 334 BC, it marked the beginning of a journey that would alter the course of history. Alexander the Great, scarcely 20 years old, led the Macedonian army from the familiar hills of Macedonia into the vast, foreign lands of Asia Minor, a territory under the dominion of the Persian Empire. What awaited him was not merely conquest, but the testing of every lesson he had absorbed under Aristotle, every skill honed in the Macedonian countryside, and every command decision tempered by the early trials of kingship. In this moment, strategy, psychology, and the art of war converged into a crucible that would forge Alexander into a general of legendary stature. Asia Minor, or Anatolia, was a land of contrasts and challenges. The coastline was jagged, dotted with cities that held ancient wealth and stubborn autonomy. The interior mountains were rugged and difficult, serving as natural fortresses for resistance. To conquer Persia, Alexander first had to secure these lands, not merely through brute force, but through calculated strategy, integrating diplomacy, military maneuvering, and local alliances. His approach was informed by a keen understanding of both geography and human nature. He knew that an empire, even one as mighty as Persia, could be undermined not only by battles, but by fractured loyalties, divided command, and the inability to inspire fear and respect simultaneously. Alexander's first significant engagement was the Battle of the Granicus River. This battle was more than a clash of armies. It was a test of his command, the first demonstration of his capacity to adapt classical military techniques to real-world conditions. The Persian forces, numbering tens of thousands and including a mix of cavalry, infantry, and Greek mercenaries, positioned themselves along the riverbanks, anticipating that the natural barrier would thwart Macedonian assault. But Alexander recognized that opportunity lay in audacity. Leading his companion cavalry personally, he initiated a daring river crossing under heavy opposition, coordinating the phalanx to provide both offensive and defensive support. The Granicus engagement revealed the genius of Alexander's battlefield adaptability. Where conventional commanders might have hesitated, Alexander exploited the terrain, timing, and morale dynamics to maximal effect. He understood that soldiers fight not only with weapons, but with belief in their leader. By positioning himself at the forefront of the assault, he both inspired his men and disrupted Persian command cohesion. The result was a decisive victory, establishing his reputation in Asia Minor and sending a clear signal to the Persian satraps that the Macedonian king was a force unlike any they had encountered. Yet the Granicus was more than a military success. It was a psychological campaign. Alexander's victories in Asia Minor were as much about demonstrating inevitability as about tactical superiority. By moving quickly from one city to another, often offering lenient terms of surrender, he encouraged compliance without unnecessary bloodshed. Cities that resisted were met with swift retribution, reinforcing a reputation for both magnanimity and ruthlessness. This blend of diplomacy and intimidation became a hallmark of his campaigns, ensuring that the Macedonian army could advance without being bogged down by continuous sieges or uprisings, a crucial factor when considering the vast distances and logistical challenges ahead. The next series of confrontations in Asia Minor further demonstrated Alexander's strategic ingenuity. He engaged Persian forces in several regional strongholds, combining the disciplined formations of the phalanx with the mobility of cavalry and the careful use of terrain. The Macedonian army, trained in precision and coordination, executed maneuvers that often outclassed numerically superior Persian forces. Alexander's understanding of combined arms, the interplay between infantry, cavalry, and skirmishers, was already revolutionary, and his ability to improvise in response to enemy tactics distinguished him from even the most seasoned commanders of the era. Alexander's campaigns in Asia Minor were also significant for the integration of conquered peoples into his army and administration. Unlike previous invaders who relied solely on subjugation, Alexander often co-opted local leaders, rewarding loyalty and expertise, while suppressing dissent with targeted action. This approach not only secured supply lines and intelligence networks, but also laid the groundwork for the cultural and political fusion that would characterize the Hellenistic era. Leadership in history is often measured by victories alone, but Alexander understood that sustainable conquest required the creation of networks, allegiances, and systems that outlasted the battles themselves. One of the defining characteristics of these campaigns was Alexander's ability to turn strategic vision into immediate tactical action. He did not merely plan for one battle at a time. He orchestrated campaigns with an eye toward the larger objectives of the empire. Every city taken, every river crossed, and every Persian contingent defeated was a step in a meticulously calculated march toward Darius III, the king of Persia. Alexander's understanding of operational depth, how individual engagements fit into the broader campaign, was extraordinary for any commander, let alone a 20-year-old ruler. The Macedonian phalanx, a formation refined under Philip II, became an instrument of Alexander's strategic imagination. Long sarissas projected from disciplined infantry, forming a wall of spear points that could hold enemy cavalry and infantry alike. Alexander's genius was not in creating these formations, since they already existed, but in using them dynamically, in coordination with cavalry charges, feigned retreats, and psychological pressure to exploit weaknesses in the Persian lines. Each maneuver reflected a deep understanding of military theory and human psychology. Soldiers fight more effectively when inspired, feared, or deceived, and Alexander employed all three. Cultural and symbolic considerations were also at play in Asia Minor. Alexander understood that conquest was as much about perception as force. He often engaged with local elites, respecting customs and integrating Greek administrative practices in ways that signaled continuity and legitimacy rather than mere domination. This foresight prevented widespread rebellion, stabilized conquered territories, and allowed the Macedonian army to maintain momentum. His campaigns were therefore not merely sequences of battles, but complex operations integrating military, political, and cultural strategy, a totality rarely seen in the ancient world. It is impossible to overstate the importance of these early campaigns in shaping Alexander's legend. Asia Minor served as both a proving ground and a laboratory where theories of command, logistics, and human behavior were tested in practice. Each victory enhanced his reputation, not only among his soldiers, but across the Persian Empire and the Greek world. Word of the young king's audacity and brilliance spread quickly, creating an aura of inevitability around his campaigns. He was no longer merely a Macedonian prince. He was becoming a figure whose ambition, intelligence, and skill would come to define the age. The human dimension of leadership also became evident. Alexander's interactions with his men during these campaigns revealed a combination of charisma, risk-taking, and shared hardship that would bind the army to him for life. By leading charges, exposing himself to the same dangers as his soldiers, and demonstrating decisiveness under fire, he inspired loyalty that transcended personal gain. His men were not merely soldiers. They became extensions of his will, trained to act with initiative and cohesion, reflecting the seamless integration of intellect, courage, and command that characterized Alexander's leadership style. By the end of the campaigns in Asia Minor, the young king had accomplished something remarkable. He had not only defeated numerically superior Persian forces, but also demonstrated the principles that would define his entire career: audacity, adaptability, strategic vision, and the integration of military, political, and psychological elements into a coherent campaign. The Persian satraps, the Greek city-states, and even distant observers could no longer doubt that Macedonia, under Alexander, was a force to be reckoned with. As Alexander looked out over the conquered lands, he understood that victory in Asia Minor was only the first step. Ahead lay the heart of Persia, a vast empire with resources, armies, and cultural legacies far exceeding any he had yet encountered. Yet the lessons of the Granicus and the subsequent campaigns had prepared him. Terrain could be exploited, morale leveraged, and disciplined forces employed with precision to overcome numerical disadvantage. The young king had begun to translate education, observation, and inherited military innovation into actionable mastery on the battlefield, a transformation that would define him as the greatest general in history. The crossing into Asia Minor was thus both literal and symbolic. Macedonia had projected its power beyond its borders, but more importantly, Alexander had proven that his intellect, courage, and leadership were equal to the challenges of empire. Every maneuver, every engagement, every calculated risk reinforced the narrative of inevitability that would follow him throughout Persia and beyond. These campaigns laid the foundation for the conquest of the Persian heartlands and set a precedent for the integration of strategy, leadership, and vision that would echo through centuries of military history. In the rugged hills, along the winding rivers, and in the conquered cities of Asia Minor, Alexander the Great had begun to transform from a prince into a military genius. The world would soon witness the full sweep of his campaigns from the coasts of Anatolia to the deserts of Egypt, from the plains of Persia to the rivers of India. Yet it was here, in the first battles outside Macedonia, that the seeds of legend were sown. The victories were not only tactical achievements, but demonstrations of a mind capable of orchestrating the complexities of war, governance, and human psychology in pursuit of a vision that would reshape the known world. The lands of Persia stretched beyond imagination. Vast plains, fortified cities, and armies whose sheer scale could overwhelm even the most disciplined forces. For Alexander, Asia Minor had been a proving ground. Persia would be the arena where his genius as a strategist, tactician, and visionary would be tested against the full weight of an empire. The confrontation with Darius III, the young king of Persia, would define not only Alexander's reputation, but the very understanding of military mastery for centuries to come. These were not mere battles of soldiers and spears. They were confrontations of intellect, psychology, and logistics on a scale previously unseen in human history. The first of these decisive engagements occurred at Issus in 333 BCE. Darius, commanding a Persian force reportedly exceeding 100,000 men, sought to crush Alexander before he could threaten the heartlands of the empire. The terrain, however, narrowed between the mountains and the Mediterranean coast, neutralizing the numerical advantage of the Persians. Alexander recognized this immediately. The battlefield itself became an instrument in his hands, a lever to amplify the strength of his smaller, disciplined Macedonian army. By positioning the phalanx to hold the center and using the companion cavalry on the flanks, he created a dynamic system capable of flexibility and decisive penetration. Alexander's tactics at Issus were revolutionary not for their invention, but for their synthesis. He combined the disciplined cohesion of the phalanx with rapid cavalry maneuvers, feigned retreats, and psychological pressure. His goal was simple yet audacious: strike directly at the heart of Persian command, the person of Darius himself. The companion cavalry's charge into the Persian center shattered the cohesion of the enemy army and forced the king to flee the battlefield. Victory at Issus was not just tactical, it was symbolic. Alexander had demonstrated that discipline, strategy, and audacity could overcome overwhelming numbers. The psychological impact resonated throughout the Persian territories, signaling the arrival of a new kind of general, one who understood both the mechanics of war and the fragility of empire. But victory at Issus was merely a prelude to the greater challenge that lay ahead. The Persian Empire was vast, its resources immense, and Darius, humbled but alive, would gather another army to defend his throne. Alexander pursued him relentlessly, understanding that war was as much about momentum and initiative as it was about individual battles. He pressed forward with a combination of speed, intelligence gathering, and calculated risk, ensuring that the Persian forces could not regroup effectively. Every city captured, every supply line secured, reinforced the inevitability of Macedonian advancement. The culmination of Alexander's mastery came at Gaugamela in 331 BCE, a confrontation that would echo through the annals of history as one of the greatest tactical achievements ever recorded. Darius III had assembled an enormous army, numbering perhaps twice that of Alexander's, including war elephants, chariots, and cavalry units designed to envelop and destroy the Macedonian phalanx. The battlefield, near modern-day Mosul, was carefully chosen to favor the Persians' numerical superiority. Yet Alexander saw the opportunity hidden within the challenge. His deployment at Gaugamela was a study in innovation and foresight. The phalanx formed the backbone of his line, holding firm against frontal assaults, while cavalry units on the wings remained mobile, ready to exploit openings. Alexander himself commanded the elite companion cavalry, poised to strike decisively at the right moment. He employed feigned retreats, shifting formations, and precise timing to draw the Persian forces into traps, disrupt their cohesion, and neutralize the advantages of superior numbers. When he launched his decisive charge at the center, targeting Darius. The Persian army collapsed, their morale shattered by the audacity, precision, and timing of Alexander's maneuvers. The genius of Gaugamela was not merely in battlefield execution, it was in preparation, intelligence, and understanding human psychology. Alexander had meticulously scouted the terrain, anticipated enemy strategies, and ensured that every soldier understood both their role and the larger purpose of the battle. Supply lines were secured, morale maintained, and communication between units ensured that the Macedonian army operated as a single, cohesive organism. Every decision reflected a deep comprehension of military theory, logistics, and human behavior, a rare synthesis that set Alexander apart from every contemporary general. Alexander's campaigns in Persia were also remarkable for their cultural and administrative insight. As cities fell, he often sought to integrate rather than merely subjugate. Local elites were co-opted, Greek administrators introduced, and policies implemented to ensure stability. This approach demonstrated a level of strategic vision that extended beyond the battlefield. Victory was not enough. Lasting control required governance, respect for local customs, and the creation of networks of loyalty. In this, Alexander foreshadowed the administrative sophistication that would define his Hellenistic empire. The conquest of Persia also highlighted the interplay between ambition and risk. Alexander often placed himself at the center of danger, understanding that personal courage was both a morale booster and a tactical necessity. At Issus and Gaugamela, he led from the front, exposing himself to the perils that could have shattered lesser leaders. This willingness to share the risks of battle inspired unwavering loyalty among his men, creating an army motivated not by fear alone, but by devotion to their king. Leadership, in Alexander's hands, was a combination of intellect, charisma, and personal example, a template for military command that would endure for millennia. Logistics and operational mastery were equally crucial. Marching thousands of soldiers across vast distances, supplying them, maintaining cohesion, and coordinating multi-pronged maneuvers required extraordinary planning. Alexander transformed these challenges into advantages. His use of rapid forced marches, intelligence gathering through scouts and spies, and careful deployment of reserves allowed him to confront enemies on favorable terms repeatedly. Persia's size, which might have been a liability for lesser commanders, became a stage upon which Alexander's operational genius could shine. The psychological dimension of these campaigns cannot be overstated. By targeting the figure of Darius III repeatedly, Alexander undermined the confidence of both enemy troops and local populations. Every victory reinforced the narrative of inevitability, convincing cities to surrender without resistance, encouraging allies to join his cause, and intimidating enemies into compliance. This understanding of perception, influence, and psychological warfare is as important as any tactical maneuver, and it is a hallmark of Alexander's enduring mastery. The campaigns also reveal a sophisticated understanding of combined arms warfare. Infantry, cavalry, archers, and engineers were deployed not as separate units, but as integrated components of a dynamic system. Alexander understood the strengths and limitations of each unit type, the impact of terrain, and the timing required for decisive action. His ability to orchestrate complex movements under the stress of battle demonstrates a cognitive and practical brilliance rarely matched in history. By the end of the Persian campaigns, Alexander had achieved what few could imagine: the destruction of the Achaemenid army, the flight of Darius, and the subjugation of an empire that had dominated the Near East for centuries. Yet beyond military victory, these campaigns solidified his reputation as a visionary strategist, a master of logistics, and a commander capable of integrating political, cultural, and psychological dimensions into warfare. The title of greatest general in history begins to take tangible form here, in the deserts, rivers, and plains of Persia, where Alexander's intellect, courage, and ambition converged into a force unmatched in the ancient world. In summary, the conquest of Egypt and the East demonstrates a critical dimension of Alexander's genius: the combination of military, cultural, and administrative mastery. His victories were not isolated feats of arms. They were integrated operations in which strategy, logistics, psychology, diplomacy, and vision coalesced into a coherent campaign. Alexandria was a physical embodiment of this integration, a city that represented both Greek ambition and respect for local traditions. In every engagement, whether in battle, negotiation, or city building, Alexander displayed the qualities that have led historians to consider him not merely the greatest general in history, but a transformative leader whose vision reshaped the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds. Alexander's time in Egypt and the eastern provinces laid the foundation for the Hellenistic era. It demonstrated that conquest alone was insufficient for a lasting legacy. Integration, innovation, and cultural vision were equally essential. By the time he moved further east toward India, Alexander had mastered the delicate balance between force and diplomacy, vision and practicality, ambition and administration. The campaigns in Egypt were a testament not only to his military genius, but to his capacity to shape civilizations, making him a figure whose influence would resonate for centuries across both battlefields and societies. By the time Alexander the Great had completed his conquests of Persia and Egypt, his name resonated across continents. Yet, even the most formidable general in history was about to confront the stark realities of human, environmental, and logistical limits. The campaign into the Indian subcontinent, culminating in the Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BCE, would test not only his tactical genius but the resilience of his army, the limits of ambition, and the challenges of sustaining an empire at the edges of the known world. Here, strategy, courage, and vision collided with rivers, monsoons, and war elephants, revealing that even Alexander's genius had boundaries. The approach to India was a logistical nightmare. The Macedonian army, though seasoned, faced unfamiliar terrain: swollen rivers, dense forests, torrential monsoons, and extreme heat. The Hydaspes River itself, a formidable natural barrier, offered both tactical challenge and opportunity. Alexander recognized that crossing it under the eyes of King Porus's well-prepared forces required both ingenuity and audacity. Unlike previous campaigns, where surprise and speed often sufficed, the Indian subcontinent demanded intricate planning, adaptation to terrain, and mastery of new forms of warfare. The army, numbering tens of thousands, had to maintain cohesion, morale, and supply lines in an environment that tested endurance at every step. King Porus, a ruler of the Punjab region, was no ordinary opponent. He commanded a force that incorporated war elephants, cavalry, and infantry trained for the unique conditions of the subcontinent. Each elephant represented a psychological and physical challenge, a moving fortress capable of breaking phalanx formations and scattering infantry with sheer mass and terror. Porus deployed his forces thoughtfully, using terrain and elephants to counter the Macedonian tactics that had succeeded against Persia. Here, Alexander faced a battlefield unlike any he had encountered before, one where conventional strategies required adaptation and improvisation. The crossing of the Hydaspes itself was a masterstroke of planning and audacity. Alexander chose a location upstream, hidden from Porus's view, and divided his forces into decoy units and the main strike contingent. Under the cover of night, the Macedonian army began the crossing, moving in tight coordination despite the river's treacherous currents. This operation showcased the synthesis of leadership, discipline, and psychological insight. By outflanking Porus and demonstrating both courage and precision, Alexander seized the initiative, forcing his opponent to react rather than act. In military history, few maneuvers so perfectly combine audacity, timing, and tactical awareness as the crossing of the Hydaspes. The ensuing battle highlighted Alexander's adaptive genius. He used the phalanx to absorb the shock of elephants and infantry, while directing cavalry to exploit gaps in the enemy lines. Archers and skirmishers harassed the elephants, causing confusion and panic. The companion cavalry, led personally by Alexander, executed a series of flanking and enveloping maneuvers that disoriented Porus's forces. The battlefield became a theater of movement, coordination, and psychological pressure, with every action calculated to undermine enemy morale while maximizing Macedonian strength. The victory was decisive, yet it came at a cost. The Macedonian soldiers, already exhausted by years of continuous campaigning, began to question the endless expansion of their conquests. It was here, at the limits of the known world, that Alexander confronted one of the fundamental challenges of leadership: the fatigue and resistance of men under his command. After the victory at the Hydaspes, his troops, weary from nearly a decade of campaigning, refused to march further into India. Even the greatest general in history faced the reality that human endurance has boundaries. Alexander's ambition, limitless in vision, clashed with the practical and psychological limits of his army. This confrontation underscores a critical lesson in leadership. Vision alone cannot compel action. It must be balanced with the capacity, willingness, and loyalty of those tasked with executing it. The encounter with Porus also illustrates Alexander's nuanced understanding of governance and diplomacy. Rather than punishing his defeated opponent, Alexander treated him with respect, restoring his kingdom and incorporating him into the Macedonian administrative framework. This act was not mere magnanimity, it was strategic insight. By co-opting local rulers, Alexander secured stability in newly conquered territories, ensuring that control was maintained without constant military enforcement. The integration of Porus into the broader framework of the empire exemplifies Alexander's ability to combine martial dominance with political foresight, a synthesis that elevated him beyond mere conqueror to architect of empire. Logistical and environmental challenges continued to shape the eastern campaigns. Rivers like the Hydaspes, forests, and extreme monsoon conditions required constant adaptation. Supply lines, already stretched across thousands of miles, demanded careful planning, improvisation, and local alliances. Alexander's attention to operational detail, the placement of supplies, the timing of marches, and the coordination of diverse units demonstrates that military mastery is inseparable from logistics. The Macedonian army's ability to operate effectively under these conditions reflects not only discipline, but the foresight of a commander who understood that an empire is built as much on preparation as on the battlefield. The campaigns in India also illuminate the limits of cultural integration. Alexander's habit of incorporating local elites and respecting customs was tested by distance, diversity, and unfamiliar traditions. In some regions, Macedonian and Greek practices clashed with local expectations, creating tension. Alexander's responses combined diplomacy, accommodation, and calculated displays of authority. The Indian campaigns, therefore, highlight a recurring theme in his conquests: the balance between military dominance and cultural sensitivity. Leadership in history is measured not only by the territories one conquers, but by the ability to govern, integrate, and inspire loyalty across diverse populations. Psychologically, the Indian campaigns reveal the duality of Alexander's character: visionary and relentless, brilliant and sometimes obsessive. His desire to push beyond the boundaries of the known world drove innovation, audacity, and strategic brilliance. Yet it also exposed him to the human limits of endurance and the perils of overreach. The refusal of his troops to advance beyond the Bias River marks a pivotal moment. Even Alexander, whose ambition seemed limitless, faced the necessity of negotiation, compromise, and recalibration in response to practical realities. This moment underscores that genius is constrained by human, environmental, and logistical factors, however extraordinary the vision. The Hydaspes campaign also reflects the interplay of technology, adaptation, and psychological warfare. Alexander's use of light infantry, archers, and cavalry to neutralize elephants demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of combined arms, environmental exploitation, and enemy psychology. Every maneuver was calculated not merely to achieve victory, but to exploit fear, confusion, and morale dynamics. In this, Alexander's mastery extended beyond tactics into the realm of operational art, a level of sophistication that few ancient generals could match. By the end of the Indian campaigns, Alexander had expanded his empire to the edges of the known world, yet the limits of conquest had become clear. Further expansion was constrained not by lack of skill or courage, but by geography, logistics, and the human element. Rivers, forests, monsoons, and exhausted troops imposed boundaries that even his genius could not overcome. These limitations illuminate a critical lesson. Even the greatest ambitions must contend with reality, and leadership requires not only vision but the discernment to recognize and respect constraints. Alexander's handling of the Indian territories also reinforced his legacy as a strategic innovator. He founded cities, integrated local elites, and maintained order through a combination of force, diplomacy, and symbolic authority. These actions ensured that his campaigns were not ephemeral displays of conquest, but foundations for enduring influence. The fusion of Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions in these regions presaged the Hellenistic synthesis that would define the subsequent centuries. Here, Alexander's genius lay not only in victory, but in the shaping of civilization itself. Ultimately, the campaigns in India, crowned by the Battle of the Hydaspes, reveal the multidimensional nature of Alexander's mastery and the inherent limits of human ambition. He demonstrated tactical brilliance, operational innovation, cultural sensitivity, and political acumen, yet confronted the realities of geography, environment, and human endurance. These lessons underscore that greatness is measured not only by victories, but by the ability to navigate complexity, adapt to challenges, and inspire loyalty and cohesion in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. In the annals of history, the Indian campaigns stand as a testament to the extraordinary scope of Alexander's vision and the practical constraints that shape all human endeavor. They illustrate that even the greatest general in history is bound by the realities of logistics, terrain, and the psychological limits of those who serve under him. Yet within these boundaries, Alexander's genius shone, leaving a legacy of innovation, leadership, and cultural integration that would influence military and political thought for millennia. As Alexander turned his army homeward, having pushed the limits of conquest to the very edge of the known world, he carried with him not only the spoils of battle, but the hard-earned wisdom of a commander who understood that genius is measured as much by the management of limits as by the achievement of victories. The campaigns in India, therefore, are not merely a chapter in a story of conquest. They are a profound lesson in leadership, strategy, and the enduring challenge of balancing ambition with reality. The march home from the banks of the Hydaspes River, where the Macedonian army had finally drawn the line, was a triumph tempered by exhaustion, logistics, and the challenge of governance. Alexander the Great, now 30 years old, commanded an empire stretching from the Mediterranean to the Indus, a patchwork of cultures, languages, and political systems. Victory alone, however spectacular, did not secure an empire of such unprecedented scale. The return journey was as much a test of statesmanship, strategy, and diplomacy as the campaigns that had preceded it. In this phase, Alexander's genius as a military leader converged with his aptitude as a ruler, revealing the multidimensional mastery that would cement his place in history. The first challenge was logistical. The army, seasoned by years of campaigns, was fatigued and diminished. Thousands had fallen to battle, disease, and exhaustion, and the remainder were stretched across hostile terrain, rivers, and deserts. Supply lines, once advancing into hostile territories, now had to sustain a retreat without the benefit of conquered resources along every step. Alexander implemented meticulous planning, drawing upon the organizational innovations developed throughout his campaigns. Garrisons were established in strategic locations. Allied and local forces were integrated into supply and security chains, and marches were calculated with precision to maintain cohesion. The discipline and operational expertise of the Macedonian army were tested as never before, and Alexander's ability to maintain morale, enforce command, and anticipate contingencies became crucial to survival. Yet governance of this sprawling, multicultural empire demanded far more than logistics. Alexander faced the formidable task of consolidating control over lands whose traditions, loyalties, and expectations differed widely. In Persia, Egypt, and the East, he had already demonstrated a nuanced approach, co-opting local elites, respecting religious customs, and blending Greek administrative practices with indigenous governance. Now, as the empire settled into the rhythm of consolidation, Alexander expanded this approach, balancing Macedonian authority with local autonomy. Satraps, provincial governors, were appointed, often drawn from both Macedonian officers and trusted local leaders, creating a hybrid administrative network that maintained stability while projecting the authority of the king. Integration of diverse peoples into the army and broader administrative structures became a strategic imperative. Alexander encouraged marriages between Macedonian officers and local women, established mixed military units, and incorporated foreign soldiers into his campaigns. These measures served multiple purposes. They solidified loyalty, facilitated cultural exchange, and created a sense of shared destiny across the empire. Leadership in history, Alexander demonstrated, is as much about building cohesion and identity as it is about winning battles. By embedding these principles into the army and administration, he ensured that the Macedonian presence would endure beyond immediate conquest. The return journey also involved the careful management of potentially fractious territories. Revolts, discontent, and political intrigue were constants in regions recently conquered or integrated into the empire. Alexander's response was a combination of force, diplomacy, and psychological acumen. Demonstrations of military might were paired with gestures of magnanimity to compliant populations. Cities that resisted faced swift and decisive action, while those that submitted were rewarded with autonomy, infrastructure investment, and political recognition. This dual approach reinforced the perception of Alexander as both an unstoppable force and a legitimate ruler, capable of balancing fear and respect to maintain stability across vast distances. The Macedonian army itself, a tool of conquest, had become a vehicle for governance and cohesion. Units were stationed strategically throughout the empire, serving not only as defensive forces but also as symbols of authority and instruments of integration. Soldiers, once focused solely on campaigns, now participated in maintaining order, securing trade routes, and facilitating communication across regions. Alexander's understanding of force as both a tactical and strategic instrument highlights the multidimensional nature of leadership. Victory is transient, but authority must be perpetuated through administration, psychology, and visible power. Alexander's charisma and personal authority played a central role in consolidation. He traveled extensively throughout the empire, meeting with local leaders, resolving disputes, and reinforcing loyalty. These journeys were not ceremonial. They were strategic acts designed to maintain cohesion and prevent fragmentation. The presence of the king, combined with the narrative of his military genius and symbolic authority, created a sense of inevitability and legitimacy. Populations recognized not only the strength of the Macedonian army, but also the vision of a ruler capable of uniting disparate lands under a single political and cultural framework. Cultural integration was a defining feature of this period. Alexander encouraged the fusion of Greek and local traditions, promoting art, architecture, and learning in newly established and conquered cities. Alexandria in Egypt had already become a center of Hellenistic culture. Similar policies extended throughout the empire. Greek language, administration, and military techniques were blended with local customs, producing a synthesis that facilitated governance, encouraged loyalty, and enhanced the perception of the Macedonian state as both foreign and familiar. Leadership, Alexander showed, is as much about shaping culture and perception as it is about commanding armies. The logistical challenges of the return journey also revealed the importance of adaptability. Rivers, deserts, and mountain passes required constant adjustment of supply chains, camp organization, and troop movements. Alexander demonstrated operational mastery, ensuring that units moved efficiently, resources were allocated appropriately, and morale remained high despite the fatigue of prolonged campaigns. His ability to coordinate complex movements across thousands of miles reinforced his reputation not only as a tactical genius, but also as an operational and strategic innovator. Governance during this period extended beyond military and administrative concerns. Alexander sought to standardize currency, legal codes, and taxation, creating systems that would facilitate trade, revenue collection, and administrative efficiency. These reforms were not imposed haphazardly. They reflected a sophisticated understanding of empire building, one that combined the coercive power of conquest with the enabling structures of statecraft. By implementing policies that balanced control with flexibility, Alexander laid the groundwork for the stability and endurance of the Hellenistic world. The challenges of multi-ethnic integration were acute. Different regions maintained distinct languages, religions, and social hierarchies. Alexander's approach combined respect, assimilation, and strategic placement of Macedonian overseers to create cohesion without provoking rebellion. Festivals, rituals, and public works were leveraged to communicate the legitimacy and authority of his rule. Symbolic acts, such as honoring local deities alongside Greek gods or integrating foreign elites into court life, reinforced the perception of a shared political and cultural identity. Leadership, in this context, is the art of creating unity from diversity, a skill that Alexander mastered in ways that extended beyond the battlefield. The consolidation phase also demanded attention to succession, loyalty, and political stability. Alexander appointed trusted generals and advisors to key positions, ensuring that authority was both centralized and responsive. Yet, even within this framework, he had to contend with the ambitions of subordinates and the risk of factionalism. The interplay between personal loyalty, institutional authority, and strategic vision became critical to maintaining the coherence of an empire stretching from Macedonia to the Indus. Leadership, Alexander demonstrated, is as much about managing human ambition as it is about commanding armies. In reflecting on this period, the return and consolidation of Alexander's empire reveal a commander whose genius transcended military achievement. He integrated diverse populations, maintained the loyalty of exhausted soldiers, implemented administrative reforms, and fostered cultural synthesis. Each act, whether logistical, diplomatic, or symbolic, contributed to the creation of an empire capable of enduring far beyond the immediate conquest. In this, Alexander exemplifies the qualities of the greatest general in history: tactical brilliance, operational mastery, strategic vision, and the ability to govern complexity with authority and insight. By the time Alexander returned to Babylon, his empire was both vast and coherent, a testament to his multidimensional mastery. The Macedonian army, once an instrument of conquest, had become a tool of integration, administration, and stability. Cities flourished, trade routes opened, and cultural exchange thrived, reflecting the success of policies that blended military dominance with diplomacy, cultural sensitivity, and administrative acumen. The consolidation phase demonstrates that the measure of a general extends beyond victories in battle to the capacity to shape civilizations, sustain authority, and create enduring structures of power. The return and consolidation phase also highlights the limits and responsibilities of ambition. Alexander had pushed beyond Persia into India, yet recognized the necessity of governance, integration, and sustainability. His vision encompassed both expansion and the management of the empire, reflecting a profound understanding that leadership is as much about preservation as conquest. By integrating conquered peoples, fostering loyalty, and implementing institutional frameworks, he ensured that the Macedonian legacy would persist, influencing generations of rulers and military thinkers long after his death. In conclusion, the consolidation of Alexander's empire underscores the breadth of his genius. He demonstrated that military conquest is only the first step in empire building, and that lasting influence requires careful attention to administration, logistics, culture, and human psychology. The Macedonian army became not merely a conquering force, but a stabilizing institution, and Alexander's policies fostered cohesion across a diverse, multi-ethnic empire. Leadership, he showed, is the ability to combine vision, strategy, and operational mastery with the subtlety of diplomacy and the authority of legitimacy. In these efforts, Alexander not only secured his empire, but also established a model of governance and integration that would shape the Hellenistic world and define the art of leadership for centuries to come. Alexander the Great's legacy is often distilled to the spectacular sweep of his conquests, the brilliance of his battlefield strategies, and the creation of an empire that spanned continents. Yet to truly understand him, one must move beyond the phalanx and the cavalry, beyond logistics and city building, and peer into the complex character of the man himself. Alexander was not merely a general. He was a phenomenon, a convergence of intellect, ambition, charisma, and ruthlessness that would define the archetype of the visionary leader for millennia. The stories of his life reveal a figure as compelling as any myth, a man whose personal qualities were inseparable from his military genius, and whose personality shaped the course of history. From his youth, Alexander displayed a combination of insatiable curiosity and relentless drive that set him apart. Tutored by Aristotle, he absorbed philosophy, science, literature, and the art of rhetoric, acquiring a worldview that merged practical wisdom with intellectual ambition. Yet his education was not an abstract exercise. It was the foundation of a mind capable of applying knowledge to the realpolitik of empire. He was conversant in Homer, idolizing Achilles, yet equally obsessed with the mechanics of strategy, the science of terrain, and the psychology of men. His intellect was not passive. It was an engine that drove his ambition and informed every tactical, administrative, and political decision he made. In this sense, Alexander's genius lay not simply in action, but in the profound integration of thought and practice. Charisma was an equally defining trait. Accounts of Alexander's presence on the battlefield emphasized the magnetic effect he had on those around him. Soldiers followed him into the most perilous situations, inspired less by fear than by awe. He shared in their hardships, led charges personally, and demonstrated a willingness to expose himself to the same risks as his men. This personal courage forged loyalty that transcended conventional obligation. Men did not merely obey Alexander. They believed in him, trusted him, and, in many cases, loved him. Leadership in history is often measured by victories. Yet Alexander exemplifies the idea that the ability to inspire unwavering loyalty is as crucial as the ability to defeat an enemy. Yet the personal qualities that elevated Alexander also contained contradictions that reveal the complexity of his character. He could be generous, honoring defeated kings like Porus and incorporating conquered peoples into his administration. At the same time, he was ruthless, executing or exiling those he perceived as threats, whether Macedonian nobles or Persian satraps. His ambition was relentless, often pushing his army to exhaustion and testing the limits of loyalty. These dualities, the visionary and the tyrant, the lover of learning and the destroyer, are inseparable from the legend of Alexander. They illuminate a central truth. Genius in history is rarely harmonious. It is forged in tension, contradiction, and the relentless pursuit of vision. Alexander's personal courage on the battlefield became a symbol that transcended tactics. At Issus, Gaugamela, and the Hydaspes, he led charges that could have cost him his life, demonstrating to friend and foe alike that he embodied the very ideals he demanded of his soldiers. These actions were strategic, psychological, and personal. They inspired loyalty, intimidated opponents, and cemented the image of Alexander as a living force of destiny. Yet they also reveal the burdens of genius, the constant exposure to danger, the weight of expectation, and the interplay between personal ambition and collective responsibility. Leadership, in Alexander's hands, was inseparable from personal example, and his legend was amplified by the risks he assumed. Alexander's temperament was equally instrumental in shaping his legacy. He exhibited extraordinary confidence and decisiveness, qualities that enabled rapid strategic decision-making and adaptation under pressure. Yet these traits were accompanied by volatility. He could reward with lavish generosity and punish with sudden, brutal force. Moments of rage, grief, or paranoia punctuated his campaigns, from the execution of Philotas to the purges following conspiracies among the Macedonian elite. These episodes reveal a man whose intellect and ambition were intertwined with intense emotion, a combination that produced both extraordinary leadership and terrifying unpredictability. The interplay between Alexander's personal qualities and his strategic genius is evident in the integration of military, administrative, and cultural accomplishments. His charisma secured loyalty, his intellect enabled operational innovation, his decisiveness ensured rapid exploitation of opportunities. In Egypt, he blended diplomacy and symbolism. In Persia, he demonstrated both psychological insight and logistical mastery. In India, he adapted to terrain, elephants, and monsoons with ingenuity. These achievements were inseparable from the qualities of the man himself. Alexander was both instrument and architect, actor and observer, commander and statesman. The legend and the man were the same. Alexander's relationships with those around him further illuminate his complexity. He maintained deep bonds with close companions such as Hephaestion, whose friendships shaped personal and political decisions. Yet his ambition often strained relationships, creating tension among generals and subordinates. The duality of Alexander's nature, capable of both affection and ruthless enforcement, produced an environment in which loyalty was both intensely cultivated and rigorously tested. Leadership in history, Alexander exemplified, is as much about managing human relationships, ambitions, and emotions as it is about commanding armies or winning battles. Cultural and intellectual curiosity also distinguished Alexander from other generals. He engaged with local scholars, artisans, and religious authorities, incorporating knowledge from every corner of his empire. Alexandria, the Siwa oasis, and the Hellenistic cities he founded were expressions not merely of conquest, but of vision. He sought to shape civilization itself, blending Greek culture with local traditions and leaving a legacy that endured in art, architecture, science, and governance. In this sense, Alexander's greatness was not only martial but also intellectual and cultural, reflecting a holistic understanding of what it means to wield power. Yet Alexander's ambition had a personal, almost obsessive dimension. He relentlessly pursued the edges of the known world, pushing men and resources to extremes. His desire for glory, recognition, and historical immortality was intertwined with the practicalities of empire building. This duality of visionary ambition tempered by operational pragmatism underscores the complexity of his leadership. Alexander understood that greatness requires both the imagination to see what is possible and the discipline to realize it. Alexander's legacy, therefore, is inseparable from the man himself. Military strategy alone does not create legends. It is the interplay of personality, vision, intellect, and action that defines enduring greatness. His charisma inspired devotion. His courage ensured loyalty. His intellect enabled unprecedented conquests. His ruthlessness secured authority. These qualities combined to create a figure who was more than a general. He was a phenomenon whose presence shaped armies, empires, and civilizations. Even his death at 32 reinforces the interplay of genius and human fragility. Alexander's empire, vast and heterogeneous, lacked a clear heir, reflecting both the breadth of his ambition and the impermanence of personal achievement. Yet the structures he established, the cities he founded, the cultural integration he fostered, and the military innovations he pioneered ensured that his influence would persist far beyond his lifetime. Leadership, Alexander demonstrated, is both immediate and enduring, a combination of decisive action and the creation of frameworks that survive the individual. In examining the man behind the legend, one recognizes that Alexander's genius was multidimensional. Tactical brilliance, operational mastery, political acumen, cultural insight, and personal charisma coalesced in a single figure. His story exemplifies the complexities of leadership and the interplay between ambition, personality, and historical circumstance. To study Alexander is to confront the full spectrum of human capability and limitation, the capacity for visionary achievement, the peril of overreach, the interplay of intellect and emotion, and the enduring impact of bold action. Alexander the Great, therefore, remains both a historical figure and a symbol. He embodies the convergence of intellect, courage, ambition, and charisma, the integration of military, administrative, and cultural mastery, and the challenges inherent in human endeavor at the limits of possibility. The man behind the legend was as extraordinary as the empire he built, revealing that greatness is not a single attribute, but a synthesis of qualities, actions, and vision. His life offers timeless lessons on leadership, ambition, and the human capacity to shape history. Ultimately, Alexander's legend is inseparable from the man. His courage, intellect, and charisma drove conquest. His ruthlessness ensured compliance. His vision created civilizations. The Macedonian prince became a general. The general became a statesman. The statesman became a cultural architect, and the cultural architect became a symbol whose shadow stretches across millennia. Military strategy alone cannot define greatness. It is the combination of personality, vision, and decisive action that produces a figure worthy of the title, Alexander the Great, perhaps the greatest general in history, and certainly one of the most extraordinary men ever to shape the world. The death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE, at the age of 32, marked the end of a life defined by unparalleled ambition, strategic genius, and relentless pursuit of conquest. Yet his passing did not signify the conclusion of his influence. Rather, it inaugurated a new phase in history, one in which his achievements, methods, and vision would reverberate across centuries, reshaping empires, cultures, and military thought. To understand Alexander's enduring legacy, one must examine not only the empire he built, but the innovations, cultural synthesis, and historical paradigms he left behind, a resonance that has defined the very concept of the great general in history. The immediate aftermath of Alexander's death was chaotic. The empire he had forged was vast, encompassing Macedonia, Greece, Egypt, Persia, and the edges of India. Yet there was no designated heir capable of commanding such a diverse and sprawling dominion. This vacuum led to the Wars of the Diadochi, a series of brutal conflicts among his generals to carve territories from the empire's remnants. These successors, despite their internecine struggles, preserved key aspects of Alexander's innovations: Greek-style administration, military organization, urban planning, and cultural integration. In this sense, even the fragmentation of his empire reinforced his influence, embedding the principles of Hellenistic governance and strategy into the foundations of multiple successor states. One of Alexander's most enduring legacies was the spread of Hellenistic culture. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became centers of scholarship, commerce, and culture, blending Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and local traditions. Libraries, observatories, and institutions of learning flourished under this hybrid civilization. Scholars across disciplines, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and mathematics benefited from the cross-cultural exchanges that Alexander's conquests facilitated. By linking vast and diverse territories, he created networks of knowledge that transcended borders, laying the groundwork for centuries of intellectual advancement. In effect, Alexander's empire became a conduit for the diffusion of culture, ideas, and innovation, cementing a legacy far beyond the battlefield. In military terms, Alexander's campaigns established enduring models of strategy, tactics, and operational art. His use of the Macedonian phalanx, integrated with cavalry, archers, and siegecraft, demonstrated a level of battlefield sophistication that would be studied by generals for millennia. Maneuvers at Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela, and the Hydaspes exemplify principles of mobility, flexibility, and psychological warfare. He demonstrated the importance of terrain exploitation, deception, and concentrated force, creating templates that influenced military thought from Rome to Napoleon and beyond. Alexander showed that mastery of war requires more than brute force. It demands coordination, planning, adaptability, and the ability to inspire men to follow into perilous conditions. Alexander's approach to governance also contributed to his enduring influence. He combined military conquest with political integration, respecting local customs while implementing Greek administrative methods. Satrapies, city foundations, and cultural assimilation provided a framework that maintained stability across vast distances. This combination of force, diplomacy, and symbolic legitimacy has become a hallmark of successful imperial leadership, demonstrating that true military genius encompasses governance as much as battlefield tactics. Alexander's empire, though short-lived, became a laboratory for ideas of cross-cultural administration, integration, and urban development. The symbolic and psychological dimensions of Alexander's campaigns have had a lasting impact. He carefully cultivated an image of near-divine authority, linking himself to Greek mythology and local religious traditions alike. Oracles, city foundations, and public rituals reinforced the perception of his legitimacy and magnified the loyalty of subjects and soldiers. This understanding of narrative, perception, and psychological influence is a lesson that transcends time. Leadership in history is as much about shaping belief as it is about exerting force. Alexander demonstrated that reputation, legend, and symbolic authority are tools as potent as any weapon. Alexander's empire also created enduring networks of trade, communication, and exchange. Roads, ports, and urban centers facilitated the movement of goods, ideas, and culture. Economic integration reinforced political stability, while cities served as nodes for the dissemination of Hellenistic culture. This infrastructure, often overlooked in narratives of conquest, reflects a dimension of strategic foresight. Lasting influence depends not only on victory, but on the systems that preserve and extend it. By establishing these networks, Alexander ensured that his empire, even as it fragmented, left a durable imprint on the Mediterranean, Near East, and South Asia. The Hellenistic period that followed his death illustrates the depth of Alexander's legacy. Successor kingdoms, the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Persia, and the Antigonids in Macedonia, continued his policies, perpetuating Greek culture, administrative methods, and military innovations across diverse regions. Science, philosophy, and the arts flourished under this hybrid system. Alexandria's library became a beacon of knowledge, preserving texts, facilitating cross-cultural scholarship, and nurturing ideas that would echo into the Roman era and beyond. Alexander's vision of a connected, culturally hybrid world influenced both the immediate centuries following his death and the broader trajectory of Western and Near Eastern civilization. In considering Alexander's military legacy, one observes the sophistication of his campaigns. He integrated intelligence, reconnaissance, and logistics with tactical brilliance. Every maneuver, whether flanking at Gaugamela or crossing the Hydaspes, demonstrated an understanding of the interplay between strategy, environment, and morale. He pioneered operational concepts that would be revisited and refined by military theorists across history. Alexander exemplifies the principle that lasting influence in warfare arises not solely from victory, but from innovation, adaptation, and the codification of effective principles into enduring practice. The enduring fascination with Alexander also stems from the duality of his character. He embodied vision and ambition, courage and ruthlessness, intellect and obsession. Historians, philosophers, and military theorists have long debated whether he was a visionary or a megalomaniac, a liberator or a conqueror. Yet this very tension has fueled his legend, ensuring that his story remains relevant across cultures and eras. Alexander's life provides a case study in the complexities of leadership. Ambition can inspire greatness, but it must be tempered with foresight and adaptability. His example illustrates that the boundaries between genius and hubris, heroism and tyranny, are often navigated through decisions, context, and circumstance. Alexander's influence is also evident in the geopolitical landscape long after his death. His conquests reshaped borders, altered the balance of power, and created enduring cultural and political connections between East and West. Greek language, architecture, and philosophy spread into Central Asia, India, and the Near East, laying foundations for syncretic civilizations that would influence art, religion, and governance for centuries. The legacy of Hellenistic kingdoms, with their fusion of local and Greek traditions, demonstrates how Alexander's vision extended beyond conquest to the shaping of civilizations. Even in the realm of personal inspiration, Alexander's example has endured. Military leaders from Julius Caesar to Napoleon studied his campaigns, seeking to understand the principles of mobility, logistics, combined arms, and psychological warfare. Writers, philosophers, and artists have immortalized his ambition, charisma, and strategic mind, turning him into a symbol of the archetypal conqueror. The term Alexander the Great has become shorthand for excellence in leadership, courage, and audacity, a reflection of the enduring power of his persona in both historical scholarship and popular imagination. Finally, Alexander's legacy underscores the interplay of vision and action. His achievements were not accidental. They were the product of intellect applied to opportunity, courage applied to risk, and charisma applied to leadership. Military genius alone does not secure enduring influence. Alexander understood the importance of governance, culture, and symbolic authority. He built cities, integrated cultures, maintained loyalty, and innovated strategically. In doing so, he demonstrated that the measure of greatness lies not merely in victories or territory, but in the enduring capacity to shape the world. In conclusion, Alexander the Great's death marked the end of a life, but not the end of influence. His empire, though fragmented, preserved his military innovations, cultural integrations, and administrative frameworks. Hellenistic culture flourished across continents. Trade and communication networks persisted, and the principles of his military genius were studied for centuries. Alexander's life exemplifies the synthesis of intellect, ambition, courage, and strategic foresight. He remains a figure whose impact transcends time and geography, whose methods and vision continue to inform military, political, and cultural understanding. History remembers Alexander not merely as a conqueror, but as a transformative force, a man who reshaped the Mediterranean, Near Eastern, and South Asian worlds. The greatest general in history? Perhaps. More than that, he was a visionary whose ambition, intellect, and actions created legacies in cities, empires, and cultural currents that endured long after his death. Alexander the Great is not only a figure of history, but a lens through which the nature of leadership, ambition, and civilization can be understood, studied, and admired for millennia. Alexander the Great, a man, a general, a visionary whose ambition reshaped the world. His victories redefined the limits of warfare. His cities and policies forged civilizations. His vision bridged cultures and continents. The Macedonian phalanx no longer marches, yet the echoes of his campaigns, the imprint of his leadership, and the reach of his influence endure. The greatest general in history? Perhaps, but more than that, Alexander was a force of history itself, a man whose shadow stretches across millennia, reminding us that ambition, intellect, and vision can alter the very course of human civilization.